when you hear a contractor or any business owner, it's not just contractors, but when you hear business owners with, an operational based company, they've got complexities, they've got inputs, they've got outputs, and they sort of reject this kind of thinking. They say, no, that wouldn't work for me because reason X, Y, Z. I'm sure that's an objection you hear a lot. Like my question to you is like, how well do lean principles translate from manufacturing, which is where I think they were born, to a trades and construction type job site? Is it like, do they migrate across those environments pretty seamlessly, or is it a lot of work to apply the thinking from Toyota to say, a build site where someone's building a custom home, or they're doing a beautiful landscape, or they're painting a large commercial building?
Easy, no problem. So let's say in Toyota, you have the process of putting on a door, installing the weather stripping, and testing the window. That's a process. There are like 10, 20 steps involved in that process. So all Toyota did was say, okay, let's look at the steps of grabbing the door, putting the hinge pins in, then grabbing the weather stripping, putting the weather stripping on, hooking up the cables for the power windows, and testing it to make sure they work. There are 10 processes, hypothetically, to that process to put on that door. Well, guess what? You're in a trench box. You've got to put down a fabric wrap. You've got to cut the fabric wrap. You've got to level the pipe. You've got to put the pipe joint together. There are 10 processes, let's say hypothetically, to put a 20-foot section of water pipe down. So those 10 processes all have an abundance of waste in them. And all you're doing is looking, how do you eliminate the waste of putting on the door? How do you eliminate the waste of putting down a 20-foot section of pipe? Because every one of those processes is difficult. Do you have to have two people jump out of the trench box and hold on to the fabric wrap, a really heavy roll of fabric wrap, and unroll it? Or do you have a dispenser that's built in that one guy just grabs it and pulls it in, and the knife's magnetically magnetized to the side of the box? You cut it, boom, and go to the next step. Those are all processes. It translates perfectly because everything we do in life is a process. Whether you're getting your car keys in the morning, you don't know where they are, whether you're making your lunch, whether or not you're putting a filling in a tooth, whether or not you're preparing attorney documents, whether or not you're putting in pipe in a trench box, whether or not you're building cabinets, whether or not you're putting it in windows, it doesn't matter. They're all freaking processes. And all lean thinkers do is look at every process, from whether you're doing an estimate to whether or not you're unloading a truck and putting the windows on the job site and where you stage it. Everything's a process. You're just refining that process in a continual fashion instead of just one time. So we're always saying, how can I make it a little bit better? It's that simple.
Okay, so let's go deeper on that. When you what are the quick wins for job site efficiency? What is the low-hanging fruit? What pieces of practical advice do you give to contractors around the way equipment is set up, the way tools are organized, the way people use materials, the way workers orient themselves towards their actual work? Like, what's the low-hanging fruit where once people do it, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe it took me that long to figure it out?
Yeah, super. There's two things. Number one, called connecting the work in a visual workplace. Connecting the work in a visual workplace. So what that means is, so instance, you walk up to the truck at Sunrock Construction. There is a holder that they made out of PVC pipe to hold every impact wrench that drives a giant nut. And the holder, when the holder's missing, the impact's missing. That's a visual workplace. So everything's visual. Where every tool goes is visual. Where every support for the ditch, like you have these expansion things. I can't remember what they're called right now. Trench box expansions. You put them in there. There are some that are 2 foot, some that are 5 foot. The orange ones are 2 foot. The 3 foot ones are purple. The 4 foot ones are red. Everything's visual. So everything has been painted. It's visual. The shovels, everything's visual. The color code, a visual workplace. The next thing is connecting the work. So if you're going to be working in a trench box, for instance, I'm going to use that example because we just did it yesterday, and you need a shovel, you don't want the shovel down at one end of the 20-foot trench box. You don't want to have to go down there every time you get it. You want it right where you're working. So all of a sudden you're working, right? You snap the shovel right to the side of the wall, right where you're working, grab the fabric, pull the fabric around, grab the shovel again. You've connected the work to where you're working instead of having to transport and use excess motion. So you're really trying to move the work, the tools, the supplies, everything together very closely to eliminate excess motion and transportation and over processing.
I've heard you say this. I've heard you say this a different way, which is like, how do you say it? It's like progress only gets made when something is being changed. And most of the time people are like walking from one thing to another. They're getting a tool. They're like the actual time spent doing the thing is like pretty minimal.
Benji, that's excellent. So let me talk about that, because that's one of the most powerful concepts. And again, this is only for 2% of your listeners, because the other 98%, they're just not going to get what I'm going to say right now. But I'm going to say it for the 2%. You ready for this? It's called value and non-value added work. So, for instance, you're working in the trench box, okay? And all of a sudden, you got to move a little bit of soil. And the shovel's 5 feet down the trench box. When you walk down the 5 feet and back, that is called non-value added activity. Nothing has changed. Right. The only time you have value added is when the actual soil is being moved. When the shovel's going through the air, there's no value. Only at the moment it hits the soil and moves it. And then when it's on the retract and you're putting it on the side of the box, there's no value added. So it's only at the moment that something is changing. And the bottom line is, everybody, you ready? This is the wake-up call. 98% of what you do every day is non-value added activity. Most of what we do is non-value activity. It's just a whole bunch of excess motion and over processing that doesn't change a damn thing. That's the bottom line. Okay? So we want to connect the work to reduce the non-value added activity, so we're doing more just value.
That makes perfect sense to me. It's so intuitive, and it seems so simple when you say it. Like when I think about my work, I know, because when I think about my work day, Paul, I'm embarrassed to admit how much time I spend looking for my keys. There's a whole bunch of time fiddling in a CRM looking for the number that I'm supposed to call. There's a whole bunch of time sorting through things to find the actual work that I'm supposed to do. If I really reflect on it, it's a little depressing. Like I'm only actually doing something a slim minority of the time.
I know.
Listen, if you like that clip, you can watch the full episode by clicking here. If you're not yet subscribed, you probably should be, and you can do that by clicking right here.